and you're with Hrishi.K.
Radio 1.
I've been waiting for this. Ashwin Sanghi, he's the writer of bestsellers like the Rosabelle line. He also has put out Chanakya's Jant, both bestsellers. One of them has just sold movie rights. So that is going to be the crux of our conversation. Also, he calls himself entrepreneur by day and novelist by night. Ashwin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hrishi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Listen, you initially wrote under the pseudonym Sean Higgins. Why?
Well, initially when I wrote my first novel, The Rosabelle Line, I wasn't really sure where I was going with it. I had spent most of my life working as a businessman. And at the time when I wrote my first novel, I'd already been in business for 20 years. So I thought to myself, I said, what in case this book turns out to be a dud and no one appreciates it? And imagine all the critics will be throwing stones at me. Isn't it better that there's someone else like Mr. Sean Higgins who can take all the stones? The brickbats can go to him and the bouquets can come to me. So it was partly a desire to actually separate identities. Later on, my parents would joke that you have multiple personality disorder. But the reality was that I just wanted to separate my business life and my writing life, my literary career, as it were. And I was always a person who was very fond of playing word games and Scrabble. So one day I sat with this Ashwin Sanghi, the letters within Ashwin Sanghi. And Sean Higgins was simply just an anagram of Ashwin Sanghi.
That is the most amazing thing I could hear on a Tuesday morning. So it's actually like that. Hey presto.
Absolutely. One of those magic moments.
How did the family take to, Ashwin, the board of directors waking up one fine day and saying, I want to write and maybe this is what I'm going to do predominantly and spend a little time on the business?
I think initially it was a bit of a shock. In fact, when I wrote my first book, no one knew that I was writing a book because I wasn't sure as to whether it was going to go anywhere. So I decided to write the book. Till the point of time when it actually got published, no one knew that I'd even written a book. And of course, it took me a while to get published, which is another relatively long story because I got rejected repeatedly over a period of a year and a half.
You didn't throw some business clout and say that, I am the director of the Sanghi group. My God.
Hrishi, the literary world is one of those which consists of so many people who are significantly more arrogant than you. So, unfortunately, I wish it worked that way. It doesn't work.
Well put. We're going to come back. It's like he was talking about, the good book he could take credit for, and the bad books would be put on to Sean Higgins. I say that whenever there's a great song on the show, it's my choice. Whenever there's a poor song on the show, something that you don't like, poor is the wrong word, it's Kobad Mobajina's choice, who's the resident Parsi introvert come intellectual, who's our music manager.
Wonderful.
Walk on the ocean toward the wet sprocket.
This is Good Morning Mumbai, and you're with Hrishi.K.
Radio 1.
The fascinating life and times of Ashwin Sanghi. Now, other than being a director at the MK Sanghi group of companies, he is a novelist. Is there some historical basis to your book, The Rosabelle Line? I mean, we know that it is about the Lord Jesus Christ traveling to India. There is something about it that talks about his burial right here in India.
Yeah. Well, Hrishi, I used to visit Srinagar a lot as a kid. And I used to always visit this particular tomb. Which is located, in fact, in the heart of Srinagar. If you visit Srinagar, even as a tourist, it's very easy for you to actually drop in and have a look at the tomb. The fascinating thing about this tomb, Rosabelle, in fact, the correct pronunciation is Rauzabal, which means tomb of the Prophet. The fascinating thing about this is that obviously who is buried there is a medieval saint, a medieval Islamic saint, sometime from the 14th century. That is a Muslim burial, but underneath his body lies a second body, which is a much older burial dating back to 112 AD. And that second body is not in a north-south direction but an east-west direction, which is typical of a Jewish burial. Now, this is what fascinated me. I coupled that particular story with a second story which emerged from the Russian explorer Nicholas Notovich, who visited India sometime in 1887, and in a Buddhist monastery in Hemis, he found that there was a scroll which talked about a young boy who came from Judea at the age of 12 in order to learn spiritual wisdom from the Buddhist masters. And these two stories began to grow in my mind, and I thought to myself, I said, what in case Jesus was truly sent during his so-called missing years, the lost years? There is a substantial period of time of almost 18 years where the Bible completely does not talk about Jesus' life. It ends off at the age of roughly 12,
right,
where he talks, where they say, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature. And then we have suddenly Jesus having become 30 years old. So what happened during those intervening years? Those are known as the lost years. So I wanted to take that story and say, well, it's possible that he came, he studied, he went back, preached, and at the time when things were going completely wrong, by the time post-crucifixion, what in case he actually survived that, saw India as his spiritual home, and came back to settle down in the spiritual land of Kashmir.
Fascinating. Now, obviously, this meant hours and hours and books of research. How did your wife and immediate family take to it?
Before I wrote a single word, I had already read about 57 odd books
Ouch.
on the subject. And my wife said that you've reached a point of analysis paralysis. So I would strongly recommend that you stop your research now and you start writing for a change. But the process was long. It was almost around 18 months of research.
Lovely. Money, money, money. Something that he's not crazy about. It's the passion that drives him. Ashwin Sanghi in conversation with me. This is ABBA.
This is Good Morning Mumbai, and you're with Hrishi.K.
Radio 1.
You listen to him talk and you want to live his life. Ashwin Sanghi is director of the M.K. Sanghi Group of Companies, business interests in real estate, automobiles, manufacturing, engineering, everything. But hey, he's a novelist by night. Chanakya's Chant, which is your second big book. What is the central theme of that?
Well, honestly speaking, I must tell you, Rishi, the idea came to me at the time of the last general elections. And I was sitting in Delhi and I saw that it had been 3 weeks since the election results and we still didn't have a government formation having been completed. And I thought to myself that, this politics of India seems to be so messy that can I attribute it to simply the present day, or was it always like this? Was politics always messy? And so I started reading up into history, really, in order to figure out what was the politics of ancient India like. And the more I went into it, I realized that, we are really lucky that we are living in the present day, where we still have a democracy, where we still have some element of stability, because the ancient day was much more complex. It was when you had a political dispute, you simply decided to wage war. Today you simply have another general election. So I thought to myself, I said, if I'm looking at a political novel, then what came to my mind first was Chanakya, because that was the one period in ancient Indian history where you had a Machiavellian tendency to be able to set things right using political strategy. So I started reading the Arthashastra. And I found that a lot of the strategies outlined in the Arthashastra were things that I saw in the present day politics too. So I figured to myself, I said, what in case there was a modern day Chanakya who had read the Arthashastra and figured that, well, I can use some of these strategies in the modern day context. So my book actually is written in two timelines. The first is written roughly in the 4th century BC, which is the time of Chanakya, and it describes how Chanakya uses his strategies and thinking to propel Chandragupta Maurya to the throne. And the second is the modern day, where we have a poor Pandit by the name of Pandit Gangasagar Mishra from Kanpur, who takes a little girl from the slum and says, Beti, I think I can make you Prime Minister.
And he does.
And he does.
Wow. Listen, that is Chanakya Niti adopted or adapted to the modern day and age. The other end of the spectrum, in the novel, there are quotes from Benjamin Franklin, Oscar Wilde, Mao Zedong. In a thriller based on Chanakya and Chanakya Niti, what are they doing there?
Well, honestly speaking, I must tell you, the way I see it is that we spent all of us went through history classes, and we all sat through them, describing temples and structures and how many pillars a particular monument has, and we were bored to kingdom come almost. for me, honestly, the fun about writing the sort of novels that I do is a chance to present history, but to present it in the form of a story. Now, if it implies that I need to make it interesting, I have no qualms whatsoever about mouthing someone else's words, provided that it makes sense in that given context, because the very same thought could have been expressed by someone else, but much better. So I am very particular about making sure that all of those sources are adequately referenced, and I always make sure that at the end of my book there is always a long bibliography which explains which quote was taken from where. But at the end of the day, it's all about making the story very, very interesting for you. I want to be able to keep you turning the pages. If I don't do that, then I've not succeeded.
Absolutely. Ashwin Sanghi is director, MK Sanghi Group of Companies, also a novelist. Now, where the streets have no name, Pet Shop Boys. Come back for more.
This is Good Morning Mumbai, and you're with Hrishi.K.
Radio 1.
Businessman come writer Ashwin Sanghi is director of the MK Sanghi Group of Companies. He's also written Chanakya's Chant. He's written the Rosable Line. I'm thinking somebody like you has got to compartmentalize his life. I mean, when do you work? When do you write? There has to be a certain discipline about that. So give some tips.
Well, Rishi, I think it's really all about figuring out what you need to do when. For the longest time, I was just a businessman. I took to writing only about 5-6 years ago, and I always used to be running short of time. Then I realized that one of the biggest problems that I was facing in my business career was the fact that there was a creative spirit in me, and I was trying to apply much of that creative spirit into my world of business, which doesn't necessarily work when you're running a family business, because there are issues of investments and capital and money. The moment I decided to compartmentalize my life, and I said, well, the business is stuff where I need to show restraint and discipline, and on the other hand there is the creative side of me, which is where I can go and vent out all my frustrations.
So bad day at the office. Here I come on my
exactly.
laptop.
So I mean, I get into work in the morning, let's say at around 10:30. I'm at work till about 7, Monday to Friday. When I get home, after I've spent a little bit of time with the family, I pour myself a peg of whiskey. I sit with my laptop, and if I decide that I want to kill off my hero on page 45 of my novel, that's precisely what I do. And it gives me a sense of power. And of course, the other part of it is that I have consciously chosen to keep weekends entirely to myself, which means to my writing and to my family. Besides that, during the course of the year, I take 6 weeks completely off. That 6 weeks is somewhat like a writing vacation. It gives me time to spend with my family, and it allows me to also indulge in what I call my creative passion.
So you do take your wife and family with you on that
Absolutely,
vacation.
absolutely. Yeah. But it's a chance for me to again, because honestly speaking, with a dual career in Bombay, the reality is that we end up spending very little time together. So those 6 weeks are a time for me to be able to recharge, rejuvenate, and it also gets me that momentum as far as whatever my latest writing project is concerned.
Listen, as far as cars are concerned, you guys have been the pioneer, the Sanghis, with
right.
Vitesse, with Sanghi Motors.
That's right.
Your granddad, tell us about this, was into, state-of-the-art eclectic cars.
Well, I'm the third generation in this business. Yeah. So, I mean, my grandfather started out in Jodhpur as the dealer for Rolls-Royce motor car.
Ooh,
and,
Rolls.
Those days were, the days of royalty. The only people who bought cars really were the Rajas and Maharajas. And over the years, of course, down the generations, we've been distributors and dealers for multiple cars. Eventually, the business also diversified into many different areas. And honestly speaking, for the longest time, I grew up not having a summer vacation, because at the age of 12, I used to go to my dad's office and I used to learn bookkeeping.
Wow.
By the time that I went into college, I was almost working full time. I passed out of Yale with an MBA at the age of 22. I was the youngest person in my class. By the time that I was in my late 30s, I'd already spent 20 years or 25 years working. So to a very great extent, the only thing that I read for the major part of my life was a balance sheet. Now, for a person who only read a balance sheet to suddenly decide to start writing oh man, that's a big switch.
Cathartic is the word. Ashwin Sanghi is here with us. He's director, MK Sanghi Group of Companies, also a writer of...
This is Good Morning Mumbai, and you're with Hrishi.K.
Radio 1.
Last leg of a fascinating chat with Ashwin Sanghi. He's director of the MK Sanghi Group of Companies, also a novelist of repute. Chanakya's Chant, we've talked about that. Rosabelle line, we've talked about that. There is a new one waiting in the wings. When? Pray tell us.
Well, Rishi, this has been my labor of love for the last 18 odd months. Chanakya's Chant came out January of 2011, and I'm hoping that this new novel should come out August this year. And as usual, history always fascinates me. Mythology even fascinates me. So I've taken these two passions, history and mythology. My next novel is a novel called The Hrishi.K, and it goes back 5,000 odd years to the times of Krishna. And the novel is based on the premise that there could have been a very important philosophy which was left for us by Krishna, which is not covered in the Bhagavad Gita. So the entire novel is a thriller which attempts to try and get to the root of what was that ultimate and priceless legacy left behind by Krishna for us.
Lovely. And Chanakya's Chant, you sold the movie rights. Awesome.
Yes, UTV picked up the rights about a year ago, and I'm given to understand that they will be going into production within a few months. But of course, the intention is to be able to, the challenges of producing Chanakya's Chant as a movie is the fact that it works on a parallel track. There is a historical track and there is a modern day contemporary track. So I think they are still trying to figure out as to how to overcome that fundamental challenge, because you want to remain true to the story. You can't go away, you can't stray away from the DNA of the story.
Ashwin, I'm going to do the radio version of credits in your book. There is a grandfather, maternal grandfather, who was instrumental in you becoming who you are today. Talk about that gentleman and what he did for you.
Well, as I mentioned to you, I was born and brought up in a business family, and the only thing that I was really taught to read was a balance sheet. Whereas my Nanaji was a person who would send me a book every week, and he would say that, listen son, there are certain things that you will do in your life in business to feed yourself, but remember that you need to do something to feed your soul. And this is probably one of those things that you can do. During his lifetime, I received over 400 books from him. And they ranged from Charles Dickens and Leo Tolstoy, and even down to Lady Chatterley's Lover. He wasn't squeamish about passing on erotica to me.
So much ahead of his time, yeah.
Much ahead of his time. And I think that was the passion. That is how the passion in me got ignited, because I ended up reading a really vast array of books. So I had never thought that I would ever make that jump from a reader to a writer. But when it happened, it was instant transformation. We were on a trip in Goa, and my wife said that, listen, you've been researching this topic enough, start writing. At the end of that 7-day trip, I'd written 10,000 words. And this is coming from someone who had never written more than 1,000 words before that. So I think, this is ultimately a blessing. I genuinely believe that when I sit down to write a book, the words don't come from me. They simply come through me. The words are coming from a higher power.
Famous last words from Sanghi Motors and Vitesse to Chanakya's Chant, Rosabelle line, and now the new one. Thank you so much for being on 94.3 Radio.
It was a pleasure to be here, Rishi.
18 till I die.